guys, and welcome back to my channel. This is part 4 of my leather jacket series. If you haven't watched part 1 to 3 already, go ahead and check out the playlist I have linked in my description down below. We're in the middle of the project and we're gonna continue where we ended the last video. There's not much to say yet, it's slowly coming together and I'm super curious of how it's going to end up looking. And yeah, enough said, let's go. So what we're going to continue with is actually the back piece, and we have the back yoke, which is this huge pattern piece right here, and then we have the lower back pieces, which are still 2 pieces. So the first thing that we're going to do is just put right sides together of the lower back, close this, open up the seam, glue it down and stitch it down. Okay, now that's done, all stitched down and glued down. We can go ahead and put the yoke together with the lower back. So I'm just putting right sides together here, matching up the center back right there and the dividing seam here. So this is the dividing seam. There's going to come another piece there. So I'm just going to put this together, also gluing it open, I guess, and then top stitching it. And now we're going to add the side back pieces right here. They're also getting put right sides together. There's going to be a notch that marks the lower back seam right here. So match up all of these points. Also roll it open, glue it open, top stitch it, and then we'll come back and finish. And before we put the lower back stitching piece onto our other finished back, we're going to sew along the stitching lines. And what I found worked fine for me was using a tracing wheel on the wrong side of the leather and then just lightly go over the line of your size to copy through the stitching line. And then with any pen, you can draw on the line that you just poked through, and that's where you're going to sew. And now that that's done, we can go ahead and put right sides together of the lower back stitching and the back piece and just match up all of the notches. And you know the drill already. Sew the seam, roll it open, glue it down, top stitch it. And last but not least, to finish off the back piece is the back hem facing. That's incorrect. That's the correct piece. So the back hem, for that we only, as this is going to sit right here, need to put right sides together and close the center back seam right here. And now that that's closed, we can go ahead and put right sides together and close this line and do exactly the same. Don't top stitch it. Glue it down and prepare it for top stitching, but don't top stitch it yet. So now that the back piece is done, we have the choice to continue either with the sleeves or we're going to continue with the collar. In my opinion, it's probably better to continue with the collar as we just don't have so much stuff to move around at this delicate area of the neck. So to do that, we have to grab our front pieces and actually close the shoulder seam right there. So we're just putting right sides together as per usual and close the shoulder seams here. We're going to glue them open as well and top stitch them, just because it's going to be less bulky. If usually for fabric you would iron the seam allowance towards the back to have a little bit of a better shape, but for the leather jacket we're probably not going to do that. You also have to match up the seam right here. It should just perfectly align, and then obviously the shoulder and the neck you need to align, and then we're going to continue with the collar. So now that that's done, we can go ahead and put the collar on. For this we have two collar pieces, the outer collar and the inner collar. And the outer collar is going to be the one that's going to be visible when worn. So this is going to sit right here. I know it's a bit weird now because wrong side, right side, you know, wrong side, right side. Like, it doesn't really make sense now, but once you wear it, you know what I mean. So the outer collar goes onto the facing, is basically what I'm telling you. And the inner collar, the one that I also cut out of the cheaper leather, is going to go onto the outer shell of the jacket. So this is the one that we're going to work with. It also has a seam in the center back just to, you know, save a little bit of material. So that's the first thing that we're going to close, open up, glue down. And I'm not going to stitch it down just for design purposes because I have in my drawing, I have sketched in that I want to put top stitches into my collar, and I want to do that into my inner collar and my outer collar separately. I'm going to tell you in a second why as well. That's why I don't want to have vertical top stitches in my collar, as it's going to be filled with horizontal ones, if that makes sense. It's just a design decision. You can do whatever you want, honestly. You can stitch it down and don't top stitch it, or you can top stitch it and also stitch it down. Doesn't really matter. I'm not going to stitch it down though. This is what it looks like once everything is sewn together and glued down without the top stitches here. And now I'm going to add the lines, and I'm not sure yet how I want to do that. I think I want to have it parallel to this upper line right here, because that's the outest corner, like the edge, I think. And this one here has like the lapel attached, and this one is attached to the neckline. So I think that would be the smartest. I'm just going to start at 2 centimeters inwards and then just like do parallel lines all over, and then I'm probably going to do a distance of 1 centimeter, something similar to that, or 0.5. Don't know yet, probably that. And have this more stabilized, and it also looks cool, so let's do that. And now we can put this onto the right side of our neckline right here. So if you've done a collar before, it's exactly the same as how it's usually done. You have the center back that's going to line up with the seam here, and then you're going to find a few notches in the round edge right here. And the last one marks until where the collar is attached to the jacket. You're also going to find the corresponding notch here on the jacket. Be careful, this one in between marks the fold line, so we don't need to care about this one for now. We need the last one right here. That's going to be put together with this one in the corner, like that. And then we're gonna find all of the other notches and just put them together. This one next to the center back marks the shoulder seam. And then this one here might be a bit tricky as they're opposite curves, I guess. I'm going to lightly cut into the leather so that it curves outwards as well. Now you see, it seems like there is more room, and it seems like this fits better if you cut lightly into the back piece. You can see here now, you can sew it nicely together, whereas before that it seemed like it wouldn't fit together. But they're the same length, just curved the opposite ways, so that's why it might not go together well. And then this one goes together with the center back. And here we're going to do the same again. And now we can go ahead and just sew from this notch right here to the other notch. And you only want to sew until the notch right there, not further, because from then on the collars split. The lapel and the collar actually like make this triangle. One quick thing that I wanted to mention is that I solved my sewing machine problem. I had the issue that my thread was always tearing when I was sewing the leather, and it came down to the needle not being big enough, I guess. You might know that they are numbered, so I was using a needle number 90, at least that's the sizing here from the brand that I am purchasing the needles from, and the 90 was just too small, like the hole where the thread goes through. It just made the thread tear. Then I figured that a bigger needle size would solve the problem, so I ordered a 110 needle size. So these are the two needles that I bought. It actually sews without any problems through 1 centimeter of leather. So that's crazy to me, which is great news because I had some issues with my leather machine. Like, it was sewing through all of the layers, no problem at all, but it was, since it is an arm and not on the table, it was, you know, gravity just pulled down the leather on one side, so it made the seam allowance not be exact and not on top of each other exactly, which is why I'm super happy to be able to use my normal machine, which you just work on the table, now with my project. So I'm going to continue working on my normal industrial machine now with the 110 needle size, and I'm super relieved that that worked out. Just as a quick thing, if you might have the same problem, it's probably your needle size, so if you sort that out, you should be fine. At least I hope so. We are now going to continue with the collar, the outer collar, and then the corresponding piece, the facing, the front facing, which is this right here. And before we put anything together, we're also going to add the top stitches, or at least I'm going to add that. There's no need to do that. You don't have to do it if you don't like the look, if you don't want to have the work. Just leave it as is. It's just a design feature that I want to do, and I'm just going to add exactly the same top stitches as on my inner collar. And it's done. It's very subtle on the right side. You can see it on the wrong side how I did the stitching, 1 centimeter apart, parallel to this edge right there. So that is the collar prepared, and now we can put that onto the facing, which is missing one part, which is the back neck facing, which is going onto the shoulder seam here. And you have to watch out that you're putting it on the correct way. So this is going to sit following this curve this way, putting right sides together here, closing that, and then on the other side we're going to connect to the other facing, also continuing on the curve, putting right sides together here obviously as well. We're going to roll open the seam allowance and glue it down, probably not top stitching because it's unnecessary, but that is how we're going to put this together. And now we can go ahead and put the collar onto the facing. That works exactly the same as the inner collar onto our jacket. So I'm just going to put the center back together right here, and then just follow along until I reach the front collar notch. And now we can go from the corner right here where we find our notch. We go all the way around to the other notch on the other side. So super important, before you glue anything or roll anything, check if you did no mistakes. So you don't want to have any folds here in the round pieces. You want to have everything neat and tidy without any pulling or tucking. It looks good so far, so I think we can go ahead and continue with prepping the facing. The first thing that I want to do is actually cut into the seam allowance where I stopped stitching right here. So I'm just going to do that for the lapel, lapel, I think is what it's called. Actually, I got a comment on my last video with like the writing of how you pronounce it, and I think it was lapel. So very sorry of mispronouncing that. During my time on YouTube, basically, I've always said lapel. But yeah, let's call it lapel if that's the correct pronunciation. And we're going to cut into the seam allowance of the lapel right here, and then also of the collar at the same spot. Because This is going to help us being able to prepare the pieces, as this seam allowance right here where we cut into, we need this to put this onto the other collar on the jacket. So this needs to roam free. Same goes to this one right here. So we can just like put them away for now. And then we can go ahead and roll the seam allowances of these two pieces open. And you probably need to cut away corners like that to make room for the seam allowance. So if you press it down now, it needs to like lay next to each other instead of on top of each other. I think I've already showed you this for fabric as well, because you would do that for thick fabric as well, like denim. You'd also cut out some corners or like some triangles here to make the seam allowance lay flat. And we're going to continue doing that all around the collar. Also make sure here, since it is very curvy, to cut all the way towards the seam so that the seam allowance can lay openly how it wants to lay. As you can see, there are like huge triangles, so you need to make room for that. So I'm just going to continue to glue this down on the first side and then just work my way around. I'm also going to glue one of the two seam allowances down first, because they need to lay differently basically. Like one side is curved a different way, I guess, because this one is super curvy and this one isn't, so the seam allowances will also be different, and then always keeping the piece where you glue it to flat. And then we can continue with the other side once this is dry. And now, just to secure everything in place, I'm going to add a row of top stitches on, I think, the inside of my collar here, so like 5 millimeters into the collar. And only from this point, so where we stopped gluing it down, to the other point over there. This is the outer shell. I prepared the inner collar seam exactly the same as I did with the facing. And the next step is to actually put the two pieces together already. So I'm putting right sides up of this and then the facing, and that should just fit right on top. I am going to put all of the notches together as per usual, and the collars are not the same size. That is because, especially with thicker materials like leather, you want to have a rolling allowance, I guess. The inner collar is a tiny bit smaller than the outer collar, but nevertheless you need to stretch that and ease them together so that you're gonna have that effect that you want to have once we're going to turn everything over. And here we're going to be very careful and put these two pieces right on top here. So I am here. I am opening this up so that this is one straight line. Same goes to the inner collar. And then I want this point, so right where the lapel notch is, I want to have that match up with the corresponding one on the outer collar perfectly. So this needs to sit right on top, because we're going to stitch right across here to have all the pieces match up and be sitting on top of each other nicely. So I'm just going to like put a clip right here to hold that down, but I'm going to check that while under the sewing machine again to make sure everything sits nicely. And then I'm just going to continue move along, and here you can see the difference of the two pieces like a lot. So I'm just going to stretch that. And I'm going to move down all the way to the zipper notch right there. And all the way down. Everything needs to just match up. I don't have any clips anymore, so I'll be doing that on the sewing machine, but basically that is what we're going to do. We're going to continue doing that on the other side as well, and then I'll come back with the piece sewn together. Okay, so now that that's done, we can go ahead and cut down the seam allowance. Especially right here in that corner, we need to cut the seam allowance down quite drastically. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to turn this whole piece over. And then we're going to do the classic cut here at the tip. And then we're going to cut layers, I guess. So we're going to take our inner collar and cut down the seam allowance to about 5 millimeters, leaving the seam allowance for the outer collar as is. So like that. I'm gonna cut this down here as well quite drastically. And we're gonna do that right until the zipper point right here. So we're going to leave it, let it flow into the normal seam allowance. And then here, we're going to switch this around, because once we're going to turn this whole piece over, you're gonna see why. That is the point where the visibility of the layers change. And we're going to let it flow into the point here as well. So here you can see that there is the change. And to pull these corners out, I'm going to use a tool. A pointy tool, any tool, doesn't really matter. And just try to wiggle the corners out as best as you can. As it's leather, it's never going to be a sharp corner, so it's always going to be kind of round, which is totally fine. But just to have like the most. And here you can see how the facing and outer pieces work together. So we're going to roll it and glue it down so that the ditch of the seam is only visible on the facing side. But you can already see how it turns that way, because the facing, it just has a less material on the side. So it already wants to lay that way. And to make this perfect, you want to take some time to just get all of the seam allowances out, like make it really, really neat, and then you're gonna have a good outcome. Right here, where we have the notch at the height of our zipper here, we're going to switch around how the ditch of the seam lays. So right here, we wanna switch it around for the ditch of the seam to lay on the outside of the fabric. So we're going to do this, so that this switches onto the other side, because right here is where the lapel is going to fold. So we want to have the change of where the ditch is going to be visible. It's gonna all make sense once we're actually like doing it. And then here on this side is the zipper, where it won't really matter that much because the zipper hides the ditch anyways, so we can just continue like that. And here is the fold line. And that's it already for today's video. I hope you enjoyed. If you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe to my channel and ring the bell so you'll get notified every time that I post. I post on Sunday, so you can keep an eye out for that. If you're interested in, my daily updates, go ahead and follow me on my Instagram. The handle is exactly the same as here on my YouTube, as it is on all of my other social media, Pinterest, Instagram, and my Etsy store. That's the most direct way to support me and keep videos just like this one coming. So if you're interested, you might find 1 or 2 patterns that you like. The link is down in the description box below. And thank you so much for watching, and I'm gonna see you next Sunday. Bye guys!